Okay, so you've got a $250 million fraud, money stolen from a program that was supposed to feed hungry kids, and a tangled web of connections that seems to lead right to the Minneapolis mayor's office. How in the world are all these things linked? Let's dive in and try to unravel the threads around Mayor Jacob Frey.
First, just let that number sink in for a second. $250 million. This wasn't just some abstract financial crime. This was money literally siphoned from a federal program set up to feed children during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the sheer scale of the Feeding Our Future scandal we're talking about. It's just massive.
And that brings us to the big question, right? When you have a fraud this huge, investigators start following the money and the power. So, how exactly does the office of Mayor Jacob Frey get tangled up in this whole mess?
Now, just so we're all on the same page, our analysis here is based entirely on the investigative reporting that's been compiled by Shasta Unfiltered. They've been tracking these connections really closely.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to quickly get you up to speed on the fraud itself. Then, we'll dig into the connection through the mayor's wife, before zooming out to look at a whole web of ties inside City Hall. After that, we'll check out the official response and the political fallout. And then finally, we'll wrap up with the central question this all leaves us with.
So, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Feeding Our Future scandal.
The scheme was pretty simple, but incredibly bold. Basically, individuals and nonprofits set up shell companies, claimed they were feeding thousands of kids they weren't actually feeding, and then just pocketed the federal money. The fallout has been this enormous federal investigation that's led to over 70 charges for things like wire fraud and money laundering.
Okay, so how does a scandal like this reach the mayor's own inner circle? Well, the story starts with his wife, Sarah Clarke.
Sarah Clarke is an attorney and a lobbyist, and she's been married to Mayor Frey since 2016. Now here's the crucial part. During the time this fraud was happening, she was the director of government affairs at a law and lobbying firm. And guess who was on that firm's client list? The main nonprofit at the heart of this entire scandal, Feeding Our Future.
But when it comes to stuff like this, timing is everything. And the timing here, well, it raises a lot of eyebrows. Clarke worked at that firm while Feeding Our Future was blowing up its fraudulent operations. Then in January of 2022, the FBI conducts these massive raids on the nonprofit, and in the very same month, Clarke suddenly leaves her firm. That timing has definitely fueled a ton of public speculation.
But the connections don't stop with a mayor's wife. Not by a long shot. Let's take a look at the web of ties that leads straight into City Hall itself.
First up, let's follow the money. During his 2021 re-election campaign, Mayor Frey got donations from at least 8 different people who would later get indicted in this whole Feeding Our Future scandal. And we're not talking about just a few dollars here. Every single one of them gave the maximum amount allowed by law.
And the ties get even closer to home. We're not just talking about donors anymore. 3 of Mayor Frey's own appointees, people he personally picked for powerful positions, were federally charged in this scheme. This includes his senior policy aide, the chair of the Public Housing Authority, and a member of his community safety work group.
And the case of Abdinor Salah is a really big deal. He wasn't just some distant appointee, he was a senior policy aide working inside the mayor's office. He has since pleaded guilty to wire fraud, admitting he played a role in the scheme while he was working for the city.
Okay, so with all these connections bubbling up, how did the mayor's office respond? Let's move on and look at the official story and the political chaos that started to unfold.
So this really boils down to 2 very different stories. On one side, you have all these documented connections, right? The mayor's wife's firm representing the nonprofit, his own appointees getting charged, his campaign taking their money. But on the other side, you have the official stance. His wife's work had nothing to do with it. The aide was fired as soon as they found out, and a flat-out denial of any knowledge of the fraud.
Now, to be fair, supporters of the mayor say this is all just a classic case of guilt by association. Sources close to the administration are always emphasizing his commitment to ethics, and they argue there's absolutely no evidence that he or his wife knew anything illegal was going on.
The public and media reaction has been pretty split, but in some interesting ways. Conservative media, they've jumped all over this, often hinting at complicity. Some progressive voices have pointed out that a lot of mainstream outlets seem to be ignoring these connections. And all over social media, people are zeroed in on that really questionable timing of Sarah Clarke's departure from her firm.
So, what are we supposed to make of this incredibly tangled web? It all really leads us to this fundamental question of proximity. What does it all mean?
And look, this is absolutely essential to state, crystal clear.
Despite all of these connections and all the public scrutiny, no charges have ever been filed against Mayor Jacob Frey or his wife Sarah Clarke. From a legal standpoint, they remain completely separate from the criminal case.
And so we're left with this question. Do all these numerous, overlapping connections just add up to a really bad case of being too close to the fire, just 1 or 2 degrees of separation from a massive scandal? Or do they point to something more systemic, a huge failure of political judgment and oversight at the very top of city government? That's the question that is still hanging over Minneapolis City Hall.